Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Tejpaul Bhatia, the Chief Revenue Officer of Axiom Space. Tej, thanks for joining us today. Tell us about what you do now, and then talk to us about your career journey from college till now.
Yeah, great. Well, Jim, it's awesome to see you. Thank you for all that you do for the ecosystem, tech, startups, VC, and back at home. I'm in Houston today. I'm at my company's headquarters. Company's called Axiom Space, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer. I joined a little over 10 months ago. And Axiom Space is building the first commercial space station. And what that means is literally we're building modules that in 2 years' time will dock onto the existing ISS. The first module is a habitat. The second one is also a habitat. And these are currently being built in Turin in Italy. I've seen them. The third module is a lab. We have an Earth observatory and a power tower. And what happens at that point is the ISS will be decommissioned. It means the governments that support it right now stop supporting it. It will be deorbited, and Axiom will become a freestanding commercial station. We're venture-backed, completely private. And my role as Chief Revenue Officer is to figure out how we make money. Short term, what's our revenue strategy? Long term, what's our monetization platform? And I see this as an opportunity as, early 90s, mid 90s of the internet. And we're in that early infrastructure layer. And we now have the wisdom of what we saw happen over the last 20 years with the internet, with companies like Google and Amazon. And I see that as an opportunity for what I can do here with my team at Axiom. And the way this came about, you said from college. So I studied computer science in college at Columbia in New York. And I graduated in 2000, right before the dot-com bust. So I got to experience the excitement of 99, 2000. And I worked at this really great company called Scient, which went from like startup to $9 billion publicly traded market cap company to disappearing in like a 2-year window. And it was a very exciting and rude awakening for me, first experience professionally. Company had great culture, but like many other dot-com companies, it went by the wayside. And then I got an opportunity to join ESPN, which is owned by Disney, in a product development role. I launched a product called ESPN3, broadband streaming product at a young professional stage in my career, and then moved on to international strategy. And then in 2007, left to become a startup founder. And I have worked on 3 different startups. My first one was 2007 to 2013. We sold it early 2013. It was a photo sharing company. And then I started a video chatting company in 2014. That one we actually shut down after a year, which was also a huge learning for me, emotionally and entrepreneurially. And then I joined a company called Explain Everything, which was started by my college roommate, and was there till about 2017. And that date is very 2016, actually. It's very specific because around the time my son was born, which is April 15, 2016, he turned 6 years old this year. I decided I didn't want to be a startup founder anymore. And it was 10 years, almost 10 years to the day. And it was around the time that he was born. And I said, I want to go get a normal job. I want to be a normal dad. I want to be there, for myself and my family. And I got an opportunity to join Citibank, which is not, typically where I imagine I would end up, but it was specifically in Citi Ventures. And I was an entrepreneur in residence, helping Citi launch new startups in the fintech space. And it was a wonderful experience. I was there for 18 months. And in that time, got involved heavily with the space ecosystem, but also, Jim, that's around the time you and I started working a little more closely together. And then I landed a job at Google as startup ecosystem manager. That's when you and I started working heavily together. And I spent a good amount of my time, probably way over indexed working with space startups, which was really stuck out because there isn't much space going on in New York. There's a lot of startups going on in New York, but my boss was very supportive in helping me navigate this passion of mine. And then 2 years ago, I made a big commitment to myself, which is, now that I built relationships in the space industry, I want to really get into it. And I made an investment, my first ever angel investment. Despite all the angel dinners and things I did with you, I still never pulled the trigger. I'd invested in my own startups, but I'd never invested in another company. And my first investment was Axiom. And it was my way of saying, this is an industry I want to work in. And I got to know the founders. And about a year ago, they started asking me to advise on a few things around business development. And a couple of months later, they made me the offer. And I thought I would have been at Google forever. I think you and I have spoken about this. I loved my experience there. And I joke with everyone, it took a space station to pull me away from Google, but I'm glad I did it.
That's great. I'm glad you outlined that arc of experiences, because it really sort of, made you do what you did, right? And made you sort of segue into this fascinating job. So you made your first angel investment in this amazing company. Tell us sort of what transpired, after you left Google. Was it sort of eye-opening? Was it sort of a culture shock? I mean, this is a new industry, and one that's going through dynamic change right now.
Yeah, so all of the above. What I tell a lot of my friends, and what I probably would tell you over a drink sometime, and I'll say it on the Zoom, is the space adventures I've had over the last year have been unbelievable. Meaning, like, I could not have scripted them, even if I tried. I wouldn't have known enough. And the experience we had, I didn't talk much about our first mission, which was AX1. Before our station goes up, we have these 4 what we call precursor missions. And on April 8th, we sent the first all civilian crew to the station. So just being part of that, the fact that I could say that, I got, these are now my friends, colleagues and friends who went up, and they called me from up there. It's a whole different and exciting experience that, like I said, I couldn't have scripted. The biggest, I shouldn't even say it's culture shock, because it's not a shock. It's actually what I know really well. And it's the value that I can add to this industry and to this company, is the startup adventures. So I specifically left being a startup founder because I wanted a normal job. I loved Google. Google was a great place, amazing culture, regardless, but it felt like a forever company, right? I could be that dad who has a stable job. I could be there with my family. I could be very proud of it. And I could probably see myself there till the end of my career, whatever that's going to mean, years from now. But the culture shock for me was like, wow, I'm back in the thick of the startup world. And what's interesting for me is this is the first time that I'm not a founder, but I'm noticing in myself behaviors, emotional behavior that is very similar to how I was when I was a startup founder. Now, I don't have that burden of, I'm getting paid, I have a salary, right? So it's not like I'm making major sacrifices that I did in my startups. But now that I think about it, I did invest money in the company, and I invested in my own startups as well. But that feeling when I'm sitting around the table with the founders, that I can empathize what they're going through. And again, this is my biggest value add, but that's also my biggest challenge right now, not because it's new, but because it's familiar. And I didn't have any of those concerns when I was at Google.
Right. So that's really interesting to hear that perspective, and the emotional attachment. Now, tell us about, for the folks that don't know much about Axiom, tell us, how it's grown. You invested, obviously. Where is it now? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so I think the origin story is really important to understand about Axiom, and that's how I found out about it. I actually first learned about Axiom when I was at Citi Ventures. Their pitch deck for their Series A came across my desk, and it was like mind blowing for me, because it was exactly my passion. It was so fascinating, but it was early days. I mean, the company was founded in 2017, 2016. And it was founded by our CEO, his name is Mike Suffredini. He ran the ISS program for 15 years. So there's really probably only 2 or 3 people in the world who can say they've managed a space station. And he's one of them. So if you want to talk about, and he's the only one I would follow, probably the only one legally that I could follow. So you've got this person who's got experience, who's done it before. And his co-founder, our chairman, is a man named Cam Ghaffarian, who has had multiple startup successes. I think we might be his fourth unicorn, but his background is in space as well. So the two of them came together and they saw an opportunity that at the end of life for the ISS, that's going to create a major gap in human presence in low Earth orbit. So, and they helped NASA recognize this as well. And this is where the privatization of destinations in space, just like the launch and shuttle program became privatized, and SpaceX and other launch providers provide that service for NASA. Axiom will be providing the station service in the future for NASA. So they started this company, they funded it. And when I first heard about them, this was a strategy. And I was like, wow, this is super cool. Tried to bring them, tried to get Citi to invest and got a lot of interest, but strategic alignment and risk just wasn't a fit. And then a few years later, Axiom got what's called a port contract. And that's the official contract from NASA that says, yes, you can dock onto our station. And there's a business relationship with NASA, and it made it just so real to me. The founders were already very real. The founders and the team they had pulled together. The leadership team, outside of myself, has been involved in every single mission to this station ever. You know, it's amazing. Like, it's the legendary who's who of the ISS. So I was already convinced that the team was right. Once the port contract came, I was like, wow, this is a real advantage and moat and guarantee that something will happen. And I had brought them into Google Ventures for the Series B. And in that time, just kind of jokingly, I said, hey, would you mind if I invest? And again, I'd never made an angel investment before. I knew what it meant because I had many angel investors in my startups, but would they even let me in the round, you know, with my tiny check? And they were already raising their Series B. And who am I? Just some guy that, you know, passed on them twice, you know, like, or my companies did. And they were gracious enough to let me in. And that would have been a win for me. That would have been my amazing space story. Just even getting the quarterly update, the investor update would have been, that's fascinating to me. And I don't know what impression I had with them, you know, when I got them to invest, but they started to call me and they said, hey, we saw the ecosystem work you've been doing with Google. Do you think that could apply to the space ecosystem, even if there is an ecosystem? And I was like, sure, you know, like, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm used to getting founders to the, you know, to a party with pizza and beer, and it's not hard to do that. Could those tactics apply? Could those strategies apply? And we started thinking about it, working with it. And, you know, I guess they saw the value. And even when they offered me the job, I didn't realize they were offering me the job. I thought they were asking me for advice on a job description, because as chief revenue officer, like, have you heard of this role? I was like, yeah, it's kind of common in, you know, Series B companies, 100 or so people, 100 million or so in revenue. You see it all the time in New York and California. It's like, I guess I could see it for a space company, but who would you get? Like, would you get someone from Lockheed or Boeing? Like, normally you would, if you're like an ad company, you'd get someone from industry, but you need kind of a totally different perspective. And the CEO just stopped me and he's like, oh, sorry, maybe I'm not being clear. Would you like to be our chief revenue officer? And I just, at that moment, just shut my mouth. I was like, anything I say from here is going to ruin it. So let them sell me on it. And, you know, I was sold, you know, obviously I put my money in the company, I was sold. But in terms of taking the job, though, that was a serious decision for me. Again, I loved Google and I have a family and life was good, is good, but, you know, this is a risk. And now I'm doing the opposite of what investment theory tells you, which is diversify. And again, I'm going all in financially and emotionally and with my time. So did I really learn much about angel investing? No, but it got me this job. So
that's great. So tell us, how big is it now? What's the value? You know, you've raised, it's still a private company, I think, right?
Yeah.
Bring us up to date on, you know, that sort of, what's transitioned since you first saw it pass your desk in Citi.
Yeah, you know, when it came by my desk in Citi, we were 5 people, or they were 5 people. And now we're almost at 500. if that's the metric of growth that you care about, right? You hear a lot of startups talking about how many people we are, and I'm just like, okay, like how are you managing those funds? For us, we're primarily engineering, right? I'd say this is a rough estimate, but 90% plus of our team is our engineering team because we have to build a space station, right? It's not, the revenue team is a few people. And then in terms of growth, since I've been here, and I can't take credit for this, these deals have been in the works. We sent our first mission up. There was 3 private customers. These are individuals on this, which is a funny story. I actually called you about this. One of the, I don't know if it's the first events I had ever come of yours, but there was, you had done one in the city at Trump Tower at the home of a man named Greg Olson. And it was a wine event, actually. We were doing some tasting of his wines. And I remember wandering around the apartment and seeing this astronaut photo and being fascinated by it. And then when I came down and they made me the offer here, I called you and I was like, hey, I remember I was at one of your events at some astronaut's house. Can you put me in touch? And then Greg and I had a really nice conversation about Axiom, about the founders. He was giving me advice about, whether it's worthwhile to leave the job at Google to come. But yeah, so, since I've been here, we've had the launch with 3 private customers. We have announced 3 different countries that we've signed to take up. There's a few more that we have signed that we haven't announced yet. A few corporate customers that went up on the mission with us on AX1 that will be going up on future missions for us. And so the revenue growth, the employee growth, the customer growth, and the funding growth. We from the Series A on, the company has raised a sizable amount of money, and in most cases, at least the world that you and I come from, these are huge rounds. These are large numbers of money, but space is a very expensive endeavor. Like what you would consider a really big growth round for a software company or a SaaS company or an app company back home, that's not enough to build a space station. That's not enough to send missions up. So it's a different order of magnitude of financing and revenue that we have to generate here.
Right. And do you have any sense, or can you give any sense for what the valuation is at this point?
I don't think I can specifically say, but in the last round, we've hit unicorn status. Okay. We show up on all those charts when you see, like I said, that is not something new for our chairman. He has a few companies that he's built. Right. And again, at just the amount of money we need to start, it's very different from any of the startups I've ever done.
Right. Now, you mentioned before that the International Space Station is coming to the end of its life. What does that mean?
Yeah.
When is that happening?
Yeah. So the ISS is a piece of equipment, right? It is probably already, longer than what I think some people thought its lifespan was. But really what it means is the ISS is, it's our station, meaning yours and mine, taxpayers. It is a government endeavor, 15 member countries, and all the citizens own it. It's not a commercial project. Now, with the partnership of NASA and Axiom, we are that business R&D for them, right? Like we are a 100% commercial enterprise, Axiom is. Now, when the governments decide to stop supporting the ISS, literally to stop funding it, that's the end of life. Now, that's end of life because we decide it's end of life. Is it possible that it could be end of life before because the equipment fails? Yeah. But the ISS is constantly being maintained. All the astronauts that go up are fixing and building and maintaining it as you would any other piece of equipment.
Interesting. And so so yours will replace it in what year? When is the expected?
Yeah. So right now, I think the date is 2030. Will be end of life for ISS. Since I've started paying attention, it's a bit of a moving target. Congress kind of decides when, and there's hearings about it. And our NASA strategy, I won't even say Axiom strategy, with Axiom is to make sure there's no gap once ISS goes down. So imagine 2030, for the purpose of this example, is end of life for the station. We need to be fully operational well before that. So our first few modules that go up will be getting power and life support and water from the ISS. Our last module is our power tower, and that's when we can be completely independent.
Okay. And so when do you think you'll start setting the first sort of pieces of this station up?
In about 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
2024. Again, with launch and development, things get delayed, but that's what we're on track for.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so
it's not theoretical. I've seen the windows, I've seen the metal, I've seen the port. It's real. Like they're building it.
And they're building it where, and how big is the factory? Or
it's being built by our partner in Italy. It's a company called Axiom Space, Tazi, and it's in the north of Italy, in Torino, and it will be built there and fitted here, and then launched from here.
Got it. And why is that? Why? I guess whenever we think about space things being built, we think that they're going to be built typically here.
Yeah, that's not true. There's a lot, and I think the U.S. is probably one of the largest provider of the station, but 40% of the ISS is built by this company in Italy. And Italy has a very long and storied space legacy, but this is true across the 15 member countries. So remember, this is not a commercial endeavor. So even when they work together, it's a barter system. It is, they each put in resources, trade resources, and they get time based on how much they put in. So it's a very fascinating, actually, economic model, in my opinion. It's not treated that way, and I don't think there's necessarily direct like accounting equivalence, but the barter system is definitely an economic system, right? It's a closed system between these 15 countries, and they I think by many countries' laws, they have to do development in their country, but this is like diplomatic collaboration at its best.
Right. And so when we talk about building a new station, does the technology, it must be, improved since the last one, right? What's the biggest sort of change?
Yeah, yes, it's improved. I think the bigger opportunity is that because we're not a government entity, there are certain things that we can do that are much more efficient than the government can. So for example, everything has to be space grade or government grade. Like I'm making this up, but imagine the cable that locks your laptop down to your desk. Might be a $15 thing on Amazon or whatever, but that has to pass all the compliance tests for the ISS, making that, and this is just a made up example. I don't know if these are real numbers, but that cable could end up costing $10,000 to build for a government module, where for us, we get those efficiencies. So, and it's something like the cost of our station will be a fraction of what the ISS costs. Now, there's certain things that you don't mess around with, human rated vehicle in space. We also get to learn from the last 20 years of the ISS and see where we can be more efficient in storage, stowage, cabling, design, aesthetics, things like that. And then another big innovation is our modules. They're all technically spaceships. They can move around and fly, and reassemble however they need. On the ISS right now, there's an arm that moves stuff around. We will have an arm as well, but the modules can be built as independent Lego pieces that can move around and configure however we need.
Wow, that's really interesting. And give us some sense for what will the space station, what's the range of how much it will cost to build the whole thing, if you can?
Yeah, I can. The ISS, the estimates I've heard have cost, 150 billion, 125 to 150 billion, all in is what it costs. Ours will probably be 3.5. Again, this is not small. Like that's a lot of money. Like you're not going to see many like startup decks needing that much money. We don't need that full amount because we have revenue and we have customers, but we need a sizable amount of money to keep the lights on and get these modules built and up into space.
Got it. So let's talk about that. How do you make money?
So right now we have 3 customer lines: governments, corporations, and private individuals. And across those customer lines, we sell everything from human spaceflight, people going to station, to research, people running experiments up on station, to insights and STEM content and anything that might be around a space program's needs. That's primarily on the government side. On the individual side, like these 3 astronauts that went up in April, obviously human spaceflight, the ticket to go up and the training behind it, but also they did quite a bit of research while they were up there as well. Everything from cancer research to pain research to cellular aging. It's fascinating what they decided to do. And then on the corporate side, it's all the above. This is entirely new space. So, the Fortune 100, Fortune 500, with the exception of a few, are not really thinking about what should we do in space. So we're going in there and understanding their objectives. Sometimes it's marketing objectives, sometimes it's research and development, sometimes it's manufacturing, sometimes it's entertainment, sometimes it's sponsorship. And we work with the corporations to figure out what the business is for them up in space.
Okay, that's good to know. As we sort of try to understand all the opportunities in space, right? Yeah. Talk to us about that in general. Obviously, you mentioned a few there, but what are, for the layperson, what are those opportunities that we're seeing ahead of us?
So, for the layperson, and I will say that I am a layperson, and this will actually all tie together in terms of the value, different perspectives can bring to industries. For the layperson, my answer is, and this is the same exact answer I gave to my board 1 month in the job. The answer is I don't know. And anyone who tells you they know should probably check themselves a little bit, right? This is like, imagine me in 1994 telling you that, yeah, you'll have this phone in your hand that has broadband connectivity and you'll call a car and it'll show up in front of your door. And, there's this whole mechanism. And by the way, there's this bookstore that somehow makes money every time you call the car because they're providing the CPU power of this thing called a cloud. That's sort of like, there's no way. So my whole philosophy and belief here is it's such early days. And I gave you, and I was very deliberate about saying customer lines, not business lines or even business models, because I don't believe there is a market yet. Doesn't mean there's a potential. You'll hear, and it's a debate I have often, particularly with people who come from the government world, you'll hear them say there's so much pent up demand. I'm like, look, if you're going to use economic terms like demand, prove to me there's a market. If you really mean there's pent up desire, I agree 100%. I've had that desire from when I was born, but my job is to turn our company and our industry into multiple $1 trillion companies. And when I say that, people are like, oh my God, this guy's crazy. And I'm like, am I? Like, look at the last 20 years. 5 biggest companies in the world are all $1 trillion market cap companies, and they didn't exist when I was in college. And like, if the internet can do that and we can't do that from space, we're not focusing on the right things. Then the question is, what do we focus on? And I go back to, I don't know, so it's a full circle. But the point is, we need to experiment. We need to test. We need to make a hypothesis, go co-develop this, invent this with our customer base. You know what? The next cloud computing, the next AI, the next advertising, whatever it is, will pop up. I'm certain of it, and I'm certain it'll happen in a venture horizon in this decade, in the next 7 to 10 years. And I need to make sure we're here, we're alive, and we are methodically experimenting everything that we can, and also leaving ourselves open for everything we don't know exists, so that when we discover it, people will be like, wow, they knew exactly what they were doing. And I don't know Jeff Bezos. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think in his early pitches he ever talked about AWS, and that is maybe the foundation of the internet, in my opinion.
Right, right. And speaking of Bezos, talk to us about the competition. How do you view the other players, whether the competition or indirect competition or not?
Yeah, I don't see it as competition for a few reasons, and let me take a step back and make sure we're talking about the same thing. So we talked about Bezos, Blue Origin. You see the missions that go up, taking 6 people. They've done a few, which I think is amazing. I see them as partners. Eventually, I hope they build a ship that can go up to station, and then that's great for us. That's another vendor on the transport side. But what they're doing to get people up and the way they've done it, I think has been brilliant. It's a different type of mission than what we offer to private individuals. We offer 10 days to station with months of training. You have to basically become an astronaut before anyone's going to let you go up to station and touch anything. So orders of magnitude different, but it's steps in a journey, in my opinion. So I see the suborbital flights, which I think you may be talking about, as partners. I think they're helping build the market, and I think it's wonderful. Then you've got the launch providers like the SpaceXs of the world, and we have a phenomenal relationship with them, right? We are they take us up to our station, we charter them for our missions, but they too are taking people up and around, and they have a very clear vision of getting to Mars. And to get to Mars, you need to build a lot of the same things. So could it be competition, partnership? Yes, all the above. One area where I usually end up talking about competition is, as I mentioned, NASA gave us the port contract. We are the solution to make sure there's no gap. However, NASA has also awarded 3 other companies funds to go build what we call free flyer stations. So once Axiom is up, NASA is not only trying to continue the existence of human presence in low Earth orbit, but they're trying to foster competition so that there's economic development. And there are other space station companies that will be out. I don't think they'll be out, anytime soon, but there will be competition. Governments, corporations, individuals will have multiple partners to get into low Earth orbit. Now, with that said, I'm talking about multiple trillion-dollar companies, these huge industries, the next internet in the next 10 years. Axiom will be successful. If the other 3 are also successful, then we have a supply issue. There's not enough space up there. I mean, there's plenty of space, but there's not enough human eligible space. Like, there's only a certain amount of people that can fit into these modules. And if all the stations are successful and we've built this market, we're going to want to be sending more and more missions up. It doesn't always have to be people, but then you've got supply issues on launch and you've got supply issues on destinations. And I think that's a great place to be.
Got
So
it.
to answer your question, do I worry about the competition? No. And we're all invested in each other, and it's all about growing the pie.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Growing the pie is critical for success in the future. And so that makes sense. Speaking of, just while we talk about space, I guess I always hear, and you watch these movies like Gravity, about the space garbage. How big a concern is that about all the things that can become projectiles and affect things?
It's a real big concern. What bothers me the most about it is it's a problem we created. It's not like there's asteroids, meteorites, all that stuff, but the space junk is litter. It is garbage that we put up there. And it is very dangerous. I mean, these are projectiles flying at 18,000 miles per hour, and I think the station is protected up to, I've heard, the size of a softball, maybe. Those things hit and it's okay, I think. But anything larger is a real danger. Now, the good thing is we can track things that are bigger than a bowling ball, maybe, and can do things about it. But, I have, from a lot of our mutual friends, actually, over the last year, I've become this de facto space guy for our VC friends. any space deal comes over, they send me the deck and say, what do you think about this? And I've seen a few space garbage collection ideas. And my feet, they're always like, is it a problem? Is there a market? And I always say, like, is it a problem? Yes. It's a problem we created. Doesn't mean it's not a problem though. Is there a market? I don't know. You're the VC, right? I'm the space guy, but I do believe it's a real issue. And I do believe it'll get worse before it gets better.
Got it. Before we get to questions, and I'll ask folks to submit those, let's talk about things on Earth. The tech ecosystem, which you led, for years. How do you see that changing now? There's a lot of changes in the marketplace right now, as far as the stock market and valuation. So talk to us about how you see that, how you've seen it grown and how you see it going forward.
Yeah, so the startup ecosystem, in terms of my job at Google and then just kind of my experience, professional experience, for happenstance, because I was a founder for so long, was something I studied and watched very closely for a very long time. And it was because of that work that I found Axiom and I was able to get into the space industry. And actually a lot of those lessons I learned, those tools I created, I'm using here for our business. What I learned when I was leading the startup ecosystem effort at Google was, I saw thousands and thousands of companies and founders, and our VC friends would always be like, wow, that's a lot of insight. You get to see all of it. And the challenge I had is I see so many though, that I'm not really going deep, and I can't tell you if this startup is good or not, but I am noticing patterns, right? And a pattern that I've seen, and this is true from 2000 on, but I saw it very clearly, and I think it's very important now with the markets the way they are, is a truism is there's never been a better time to be a founder. And I think every day you say that is true. It's better today than it was yesterday. And there's several reasons for this, that you can look over a span of 20 years, you can look over a span of 2 years, is the barrier to entry is so low. I'm talking purely technical right now. When I got out of college, even if you wanted to start a company and it was a software company, you had to build a server closet, right? Like you were talking a couple of $1 million no matter what, just to get started, if anyone wants to visit your website. And that changed pretty quickly. And Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services have now not only made it cheap, they've made it, and not only made it free, they made it so that companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft pay startups to use their platform through credits. But, in that sense, it's never been a better time. Second, the development tools, things that startups are creating right now with artificial intelligence and machine learning were literally theoretical when I was in college, mid-90s. Like I studied some of the things I'm seeing like young kids creating right now, that there were professors and people who would, in textbooks, I would say, there will never be enough computing power for this algorithm to really work. And now it's like, it's the opposite. There's an abundance of it. So that one pattern is there's never been a better time. Now people will say, like, look at the markets, is VC money drying up and all this. The biggest opportunities I've seen, and I've now had the fortune of time, I guess, to see this a couple of times. I was part of the 2000-2001 crash, the 2008 crash. I would argue 2020 was a little bit of this way also, but mostly because pandemic and uncertainty and what we're going through right now. And some of the biggest and best startups we've seen and companies we've seen have come out of these times. And there's a lot of noise. There's noise always when you're a startup founder, that I need to raise money, I need to hit these metrics, I need to do this. And then when these things like, oh, it's drying up, sometimes excuses, but it's hard to raise money no matter what. I was a founder 3 times and it was hard every time. It got easier because I understood the process and I knew the people, and there were certain shortcuts, but it's really hard work to be a founder. So when the times are tough, a couple of things happen. You still have to work hard. You become much more resourceful because resources are more scarce. And when you talk about hiring people, getting customers, your salesmanship as a founder has to like level up like crazy because you have to convince people on your vision, which you have to do anyway, good times or bad. But you see really resilient and strong founders coming out of these times.
Got it. That's good to know. And I think even with the markets, the gyrations right now, in some ways, that might help things as you know, there'll be more labor available, and we'll come back to reality, right? There might be some silver linings as we see some of the market gyrations, right?
I think so. One of the things, and this is also could me just me not fully understanding, even though I was a founder for so long and I raised quite a bit of money from many people, I never fully understood like when VCs talk about the market being frothy or valuations are too high. And I mean, that's all well and good, like, sure, right? There's clearly an industry and a business and an economy and founders who are good at creating a market for their deal, get the best valuation. But at the end of the day, it's still really hard to build a business. The success rate is so low, even for Series A and B funded companies. So yeah, it would be better if there wasn't an economic downturn. It would be better if there weren't uncertainty, but it's going to be hard no matter what. And I kind of going back to what I said before about the space adventures versus the startup adventures, the value I bring to this company is that startup experience. Yes, this company has raised more money than any of the startups I've ever been involved in and has grown to a level. The deals I'm doing are bigger than I've ever done. But some of those patterns are just the same. Like, a startup, it's a dysfunctional organization till it's not. And I think, the successful companies become successful sometimes despite their dysfunction, and other ones stop being dysfunctional. But either way, there's something about the product, the market, the founders, the timing that get a very few companies out on the other side. And I just don't think the market fluctuations really impacts it too much. If anything, to your point, creates silver linings or creates opportunities that weren't there before.
Right. Good point. So what about, you see a lot of things besides space in the tech sort of landscape. What things are you excited about as far as new tech, trends out there that we might not be aware of?
It was interesting. This question I got a lot when I was in my role at Google, and I was always nervous about it. And it's for that same reason. Like, this guy is seeing thousands of startups and he can't even pick up a pattern. Like, he can't tell us what's good or not. But there was a few that stuck out, and I don't want to make this a general trend. Like, I was obviously emotionally, just my kind of tunnel vision was on space. But the areas that really bubbled up for me, where I saw things that seemed magical, was very much around machine learning and AI. I would like to say quantum computing, but that's just me throwing out a buzzword. I still don't fully understand it. But what I saw startups, what I saw them doing, and sometimes not in sexy ways, like supply chain, leveraging machine learning and AI to take industries that are still pencil and paper. And I say pencil and paper, I don't say pen and paper, like literally, like some shipping, like shipyards and stuff are still using tools from 100 years ago. I'm not talking spreadsheets. I'm talking, what New York City, the West Side used to be, when the meat packing district was actually, slaughtering meat over there. And I just see what the power of this abundance of computing and entrepreneurs with creativity that they have. I just see it being amazing. Like I said, in the last 3 years, what I've seen startups do were things that were theoretical when I was in college. And what I've seen over the last year are things that I didn't even know could exist. And it's just amazing. You take that entrepreneurial spirit of founders, I keep saying kids, but it doesn't have to be kids. And these tools, they're just starting at a totally different level than anything I've seen before.
Got it. And what about innovation hubs or entrepreneurial communities geographically? Now, everything's been obviously changed during the pandemic, where New York is coming back. I think you'll agree, but I'm curious to get your perspective. Obviously, you're in Texas now. How do you view that sort of landscape of surging hubs?
Yeah, this is right before the pandemic, I feel like this is a lot of work you and I did together, particularly in New Jersey. Um, but one of the areas I was studying, my whole team was studying. I was based in New York, and I covered the East Coast. Basically, I had a counterpart on the West Coast, and we had people in 8 different cities around the world. But we were really studying ecosystems. The 8 cities we were all in were chosen because they were known ecosystems. San Francisco, New York, Boston, LA, London, Singapore, Tel Aviv, and Bangalore. Those were our 8. Uh, just given, there's a lot of startup stuff going on there. And when I say stuff, like the pillars I always looked at were founders, capital sources, founders, investors, capital sources, talent, and infrastructure. And what we would do is go into cities and really start to plug into those pillars of the ecosystem. And one of the things we did was look at the next tier of cities, upcoming ecosystems. And some are obvious, I'm saying tier 2, not because they're any lesser than anything else, but just there were only 8 of us on our team. But Miami, and you could say that the pandemic really sparked that, and the mayor did all this stuff, and crypto did all this stuff, and the pandemic pushed people down there. Miami was on our radar years ago. Like it was starting, like you could feel it. Austin is also a good one. Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver all had good ones. I'm in Houston now. I was spending quite a bit of time in Houston while I was at Google, primarily because I loved space. But there was an ecosystem, or the beginnings of an ecosystem here. And what I saw, and I started with New Jersey, is we sometimes lump New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, tri-state area together, but you could see just break up the states within Jersey and different parts of Jersey ecosystems building, where the founders are, where there's legacy exits and wins, and then where there's funding. And if you just look at New York and break that down, there's definitely a different ecosystem between Brooklyn and Manhattan, and Queens, Long Island City, Bronx. So it's still very fascinating. Now, what the pandemic did is, first of all, it took a lot of in-person stuff, that you and I used to do all the time, right? I think there was even one event that you were planning post-pandemic that we pulled back from because there was a surge, right? We ended up doing it virtual. I think that hurts a lot. There's a lot of pros to the virtual stuff because now your ecosystem spreads, you can get talent everywhere, but there's something about the serendipity of running into people and communication flowing that I think just has to be in person. And I think to your point about New York bouncing back is just New York geographically, and also spirit-wise, the type of people are there is just that kind of place, like very dense. Couple of super nodes, certain people, mutual friends, I would put you as one of those super nodes, connectors. But once that's there and the infrastructure of meeting and startup hubs and the government and the universities being involved, it just creates this ooze, this goo that allows all this stuff to happen. And it was tough to do that during the pandemic.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful what you just outlined there. We're coming to the close of this really great conversation, Tej. Before we do, I want to ask, what should we all know about, how to get involved in the space industry?
Yeah, for me, it was a very conscious decision. I mentioned that, 6 years ago, I decided I didn't want to be a startup founder anymore. I had all these, a decade of startup experience, and I was able to leverage that into, great jobs. But I had, at some point, made a decision. I want to work in space, in the space industry. And the advice I'd give, and I don't think this is specific to the space industry, but especially if you're an outsider or you feel like an outsider, find your value. What's the value you can add to that industry, that company, that ecosystem, and then massively commit to adding as much value as you possibly can to that ecosystem. Don't worry about what you're going to get out of it. Don't think about it extracting value from it. Just everyone you meet and everything you go to and everything you do is just focus on how much you can put in. And I'll give an example on both those things, finding your value and then making that massive commitment. When I decided I wanted to work in space, I met with someone who's now a great friend. It was my first time meeting him. And I said, hey, I want to work in space, but I'm not a rocket scientist. and I'm not a billionaire. And he said to me, he's like, well, there's a lot of white space between those two things. And it's amazing that you know what you want, but why would you immediately go to tell me what you're not? Focus on all the things you are. You've got this platform at Google to support startups. There's a lot of space startups. They need people like you with your experience. And that was a click for me. And I used my professional platforms to support startup ecosystems around the world anyway, but then really honing on space startups where I could. And then my massive commitment was the investment in Axiom. Like I'm gonna do something that puts skin in the game. And I know other people who've used that to go back to school, use that to start a company. But for me, it was the investment, and it worked out.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it doesn't have to be money. It could be time, advising a company, or working for free, right, for a company, getting to know that company, that industry, right?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And for me, the reason it was the money was also because it was the beginning of the pandemic. So I invested in March of 2020, and my startup ecosystem work at Google was so heavily in person. And I'd switched roles to a very meaningful role with our chief information officer, but it was different. I was working with Fortune 100 companies, C-levels about the pandemic, work from home, and hybrid, the future of work, that I was a little concerned that my time alone wasn't going to be enough commitment to motivate me. And the money to me it wasn't like, oh, I hope, in my head, it's like, okay, this is an investment in me, right? It's a course I could take, or, something like that. But it was that motivator for me that this is real. And again, like I said, I would have been happy just getting the quarterly updates from the company, but it turned out to be a lot more than that.
Right. That's really interesting. We usually end these talks, Tej, with a poem or a saying. So what can you share with us?
Sure. So I brought up a poem that I wrote. I mentioned the pandemic and the challenges it had for ecosystem builders like us. And I learned a few things about myself that I'd learned prior to the pandemic, which is I'm an extreme extrovert. I get tons of energy from people. Like I rarely need me time. Like recovery to me is going out and being with people like you, like talking about this stuff. And the pandemic made that abundantly clear because it was very lonely. And I had run into a friend of ours, Nahal from ENIAC, on the street. And I told him how lonely I was feeling. And he said, you should come run with us. And I'm like, oh, I hate running. Again, going back to narratives and telling the stories. And he was like, it's a really chill run group. We've been doing it for years. It's called Pitch and Run. And a bunch of VCs have been running for years, investors and venture capitalists. And we invite founders to come pitch us their startups while we're running. So like, oh, that's interesting. Cool. I'll check it out. And over the pandemic, we're getting back to now people actually pitching. But for the first year, it was more about camaraderie and the community. And I made some really great friends and realized that, my narrative about running was wrong. I actually do like it. I like it better with friends. But so I wrote this poem, not for the running group. I actually wrote it for the river, the Hudson River where we run by, but it is a homage to the group. So the title is Hudson River. And actually, it's not even about running. It's not about the river. It is actually more about mental health. But here I go. So you have been running much longer than my mind has been racing. I run alongside you, trying to catch my thoughts. You remind me that it is a race I can't win. My demons haunt me. My desires taunt me. When we run together, you graciously carry both for me. Thank you for washing away the darkness and holding on to the dreams. That's called Hudson River.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that Tej. That's really meaningful. This has been great. Good luck with all your space adventures, and let's keep in touch. And we look forward to having you back to tell us what's next. Okay?
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me. Thanks for everything you do.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.